Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and here I am still in Dad's shed. And there's a reason that I'm still in Dad's shed, and that's because we're under really strict COVID lockdown right now, and I actually can't go anywhere else. So this is putting a really big kink in my plans to explore Australia. And so I thought I'd give you a big update today. How did I get here? Why is this happening now? What's going on with Australia and COVID? If you want to learn more and what are my plans to finally get out of here and hit the road, stick around. I'll get into all the details right now. So before I get into too many details about what's going on right now and what I'm going to do about it, I need to give you some background. I need to tell you how I got here and how Australia got itself in the situation that it's in. So when I got back from Africa, I toured North America, I showed off my Jeep, I sold books, I told stories about my huge trip all the way around Africa. And there's no doubt about it, I was utterly exhausted after 3 years on the road in Africa, then basically a year on the road in North America. And so I was totally happy to take a break, take some time off. And so it was right around the start of 2020 that I was beginning to dream of my next steps. And I actually had planned a book tour to go all across Canada and eventually the US as well for the launch of my new Africa book. And then of course COVID hit, and you all know the world completely changed, and I don't need to tell you all about that. And so towards the end of 2020, I started getting a bit desperate about where can I go and what can I do. And it was actually right at this time of year, I drove up the Alaska Highway, I went back up to Whitehorse to see all my old friends, to have adventures in the Yukon. And that really just made me more and more desperate to get out and have bigger adventures. And you know, looking on the global scale, even today, borders are closed all over the world. You can't drive through South America right now. You can't drive any of Central Asia, all the stands, Mongolia, all of those borders are closed. So the more I started looking at it, the more I realized I couldn't really go international. And I was kind of stuck in Canada too. The border from Canada to the US was closed for a year and a half. And when I started talking to my family here in Australia, they said, guess what, Dan? Australia doesn't even have COVID. There are no restrictions here. I said, what do you mean? And so it turns out, because Australia is an island, what they decided to do was completely eradicate COVID. And so when you arrive from an international flight, you do have to get locked in a hotel room for 2 weeks. You saw all my stories about how I went through that. But then basically, when you get out of hotel quarantine, that's it. There's no COVID in the whole country, so you can go anywhere you want. You can do anything you want. And in fact, I spoke to my uncle just last week. He lives up in Queensland, which is up in the north. For the entire pandemic, he's only ever had to wear a mask for about 2 weeks to go to the supermarket. That's it. Nothing else. No bars are closed, no restaurants, movie theaters, everything is open. They're still having sporting events now with 40 or 50,000 people in the stadium. That's because they have no COVID. So life has gone on in Australia as normal, which is incredible. And of course I got enticed by that and I said, great, I want to go to the land of no COVID. I'll buy a 4-wheel drive, I'll deck it out at Dad's place, and then I'll hit the road and I'll be able to have ultimate freedom exploring to my heart's content. Sounds like a great plan, doesn't it? Of course, plans never quite work out, and when you put them to the test, they always fall apart. And so what's happened now is that COVID did escape quarantine. So some international arrivals in Sydney, Delta variant, I guess, is so much more transmissible that it escaped quarantine, and there's a huge outbreak in Sydney right now. Something like 1,500 cases every day is happening, and a few deaths as well, which is a big deal in Australia. That is a lot of cases. And unfortunately, some people brought it down to Victoria, which is the state that I'm in. And so now this state as well has an outbreak, and we're under really strict lockdown right now. And so that means the two biggest states, or the most populated states in Australia, Victoria and New South Wales, they're the two that have Melbourne and Sydney. Right now, severe lockdown. We cannot go more than 5 kilometers from our own house. There's no bars open, no restaurants. You can only be outside to exercise for an hour or two a day. You can't go into other people's houses. All kinds of restrictions like that, because they're trying so hard to contain this outbreak. And there's a huge, big complicating factor to this is that Australia didn't get a jump start on vaccinations like the rest of the world did. Because there was no COVID here just a few months ago, there was no real rush to get vaccinated. The government didn't do a good job bringing in vaccinations, and people didn't rush out to get vaccinated. So that means right now, the Australian population are not very heavily vaccinated, but Delta variant is spreading in Victoria and New South Wales, the two states with the most people. So what does that actually mean for me and my trip? Well, it's a real problem because what it means is the other states in Australia, let's say everything to the west, which is really where I'm excited to go exploring, they're viewing these two states right now as, absolutely under no circumstances can anyone enter. Because someone coming from here might bring COVID over there, and then suddenly they're going to have COVID. And like I said, there's cities, many, many cities of millions of people that have never had a single COVID case. So they've had no restrictions and no interruption to their lives. So it kind of makes sense. Why would they want to let me in? And so that's the challenge that I face right now. The way that Australia is dealing with it is they have all these apps on your phone and you have to apply for permission to be allowed to cross a state border and get into a different state. And ironically enough, if I was in one of those other states right now, I would be able to move around those fairly effortlessly. Because I'm in a region that has no COVID, I can easily get into another region that has no COVID. So I could move from Western Australia up to the Northern Territory, down to South Australia, and there's easily 6 months of exploring in there. So if I could just get there, that would be amazing. The challenge is none of them want to let me in because I'm in Victoria right now, and Victoria is a hotspot. There are COVID cases here. So what's my plan? What am I going to do about this? Well, there's a couple of different things happening at the same time. And the first one is the government is finally putting its foot down and really accelerating the vaccination program. And so I actually just became eligible 2 weeks ago for my first vaccine shot. So I raced out, I got that on the second day that I was eligible. And now more than 100,000 people every single day are getting vaccinated across Australia. So that means the percentage of people that are vaccinated is going up really, really fast. And there's a lot of talk right now, all the states are arguing, the Prime Minister's trying to corral them. Hopefully, fingers crossed, everything will start to ease and the restrictions will lift once about 70% of people are vaccinated. And so here in Victoria, that is predicted to happen towards the end of September, that 70% of Victorians will be first dose vaccinated. And so hopefully then some of the restrictions will ease and we'll be able to start traveling. Hopefully then other states as well will start to say, okay, it's not so dangerous to let them in because we're vaccinated, they're vaccinated, and we can start having interstate travel again. So sort of plan A is to kind of wait for that to happen. And when enough people are vaccinated, by then I'll be double vaccinated. Hopefully then I'll be able to move into a different state and then really get this trip underway. There is another option as well, which looks more promising in the short term and I'm really excited about. And so what's going on right now in Victoria, basically all of the COVID is in Melbourne. It's in the big city. Out here, I'm 3 or 4 hours away from Melbourne. There, I don't think has ever been a COVID case out here. So what they've done is they've kind of divided the state into either metropolitan Melbourne or rural Victoria. And so I'm considered part of rural Victoria right now. And in the past, what they've done, although Melbourne will remain on lockdown and have all the severe restrictions, the rest of Victoria is allowed to open up and go back to no restrictions. And fingers crossed, there's a lot of rumors that that's about to happen this week. And so that means that I would be able to start exploring Victoria. So Victoria is a huge state. It actually has everything and tons of stuff to explore, tons of great camping and hiking and beautiful places. And I'll be able to go to all of those. I just have to avoid Melbourne. But that's fine. I'm okay with that. From my perspective, Melbourne's just a big city anyway. I'd rather be out in the wilderness. So my short-term plan is, as soon as I'm able to, I'm going to hit the road and I'm going to start exploring Victoria. And while doing that, I'm going to keep really close eye on the news and fingers crossed, one of the neighbouring states, it would either be South Australia or it would be Tasmania, is going to view us and say, okay, all of the COVID in Victoria is in Melbourne, so really only Melbourne should be a hotspot and people from the rest of Victoria can be allowed into our state. That's really what I'm banking on, and I'm really hoping that'll happen. And if that does happen, I'm basically going to hightail it out of Victoria as fast as I can, cross that border into whatever other state I can get into, because then I'm free to explore the vast majority of Australia. Because after that, any other state that I want to get into, they're going to say, where have you been in the last 14 days? And I'll say, I've been in South Australia, which doesn't even have a single COVID case. And they'll say, okay, great, you can come into our state, no problem at all. So the trick right now is I just need to get out of Victoria and New South Wales, get to the rest of Australia, and then I'll be free to roam and explore. So that does have another consequence as well, and that is that the Jeep isn't quite finished. And so COVID has been utterly messing up all my plans. Shipping is so delayed. Lots of companies are having trouble making parts. Things just have not arrived that I expected to arrive 2 months ago, 3 months ago. And so that is an unfortunate consequence. It looks like I'm going to get on the road here in Victoria with the suspension that's already on the Jeep. And is that absolutely ideal? No, it isn't. Ideally, it would be able to carry the weight a bit better. Ideally, I'd raise it up a fraction. But, you know, at some point when these trips are happening, when you're going global, ideal isn't actually possible, and you just have to go for what's actually achievable and what's possible. So the suspension, hopefully I'll be able to upgrade it in a few months' time. Maybe when I swing back here, or maybe I'll get it sent elsewhere in Australia. I'll just have to wait and see on that. Similar story with my kitchen setup. It's still being manufactured over in Canada, so it has to be finished and then actually sent over, has to arrive. I don't even know if I have to pick it up at the airport and if I'm legally allowed to do that. So the kitchen is a huge question mark right now as well. And so all I'm gonna do about that, I'm just gonna use a cooler for now, buy bags of ice, and I'm just gonna hit the road and camp like I did from Alaska to Argentina. It'll be super simple, super basic camping, but that's enough. That'll get me out on the road so that I can have adventures. Same story goes with the extra petrol tank, the auxiliary fuel tank that I'm waiting for. I'm told it's extremely close. They're just waiting on new evaporative canisters to arrive from China. And again, I'm gonna hit the road for now. There are plenty of adventures I can have with just the stock amount of fuel that the Gladiator can carry. You know, 600 kilometers, 350 miles. That's plenty of range for 99.9% of activities that I wanna have. There's only a couple of places where I really need the mega range, and I wasn't planning on doing those soon anyway. They're right in the heart of Australia, some of the most remote roads in the world, and it's getting hot now. Summer's coming really fast. So actually, I plan to do those in about May or June of next year. So to some degree, I don't actually need the auxiliary fuel tank until then. Ideally, I'd get it installed right now while I'm here, but again, you can't always have the ideal solution. Sometimes you just have to work on what's actually possible. So that's kind of where I'm at and kind of what my plan is. And I feel like this is a great chance to talk about what it's really like trying to build an overland vehicle when you're around the world. And you know, I lived in Australia for 23 years. My family's here. I've obviously got access to a great workshop. I thought it would be relatively similar to build it here in Australia as it would be to build it where I did last time in Canada and the US. But I have to say, if you're thinking about just flying somewhere and building an overland vehicle, I really have to impress on you, it is much more difficult than it is in the US and Canada. Stuff here, it's just harder to get. It's more expensive, shipping takes longer, hardware stores don't have the same things that you would be used to in North America. Everything just feels a little more complicated and a little more difficult. And part of that will be because of COVID's delaying everything. But you know, I think it's really worth remembering, if you fly down to Argentina, you can't just walk into a store and buy like a fridge for your four-wheel drive or a winch or a roof rack or a rooftop tent. Those things are going to be very, very hard to get your hands on. I have to remember that I'm in Australia, which is a country that has tons of vehicles set up for touring and overlanding. So those items typically are easy to get, but actually I'm still finding it really difficult compared to what it's like in America and Canada. So if you're planning a global trip and you're planning on just flying into some country and building your vehicle, just be a little bit careful, budget some extra time, definitely budget extra money, because I thought I had a handle on how complicated this was going to be, and it turns out I was wrong. This has taken twice as long as I thought it was going to. It's cost a lot more money than I thought it was going to, and it still isn't even finished yet. So it's not as easy as it would be in the US or Canada. Really keep that in mind when you're building your overland vehicle. So in the meantime, I'm here at Dad's place for hopefully only another week before I can start exploring Victoria. So I'm gonna make the most of it. There's a few more things I can do on the Jeep, a few more things I can show you guys, and then fingers crossed, I'll be on the road in not too much time. So I hope that video has been helpful, and I hope it gives you more background into what's going on in Australia right now, why is it a bit different than the rest of the world, and how it's impacting my travel plans. So as you can tell, I am trying my hardest to get on the road as soon as I can, but there's a lot of stuff that's outside my control. So in the meantime, I'm really enjoying time with Dad. We're cooking great food, we're reminiscing, we're looking at old family photos. I am able to go surfing because the beach is pretty close. So all things considered, as far as lockdowns go, I think I'm doing okay. This isn't a horrible place to be. So if you'd like to learn more, you'd like to get behind the scenes access, early access, and learn from what I've done in the past and the vehicles that I've built, the trips that I've taken, all of that information is available to my supporters over on Patreon. So a huge thanks to them for helping me bring these videos to life and helping to get me back on the road as soon as possible. So thanks very much again for watching. Stay safe out there. Hopefully you can get out on adventures, and hopefully I'll bump into you on the road.